In 1933, a 16-year-old farm boy named Kaname Harada joined the Imperial Japanese Navy. His grandfather had been a samurai. His uncle had died charging a hill in the Russo Japanese War. Harada wanted to see the world. He endured brutal basic training, served aboard a destroyer, and later passed the grueling exam for the Navy's aviation course. In April 1937, he graduated at the top of his class. The emperor's second cousin presented him with an Onshi silver pocket watch, an imperial gift engraved with the emperor's crest. That same year, another boy named Isamu Miyazaki watched American barnstormers perform aerial stunts over his hometown. He decided then that he would fly. Miyazaki joined the Navy in 1936 and sailed the world aboard the cruiser Iwate, visiting Egypt, Italy, and France. While anchored in Bombay, he learned that war had broken out with China in July 1937. The conflict would soon pull both young men toward a destiny neither could fully imagine. Years later, in 1940, Miyazaki patrolled the Yangtze River aboard the gunboat Atami. His crew intercepted smugglers, cleared floating mines, and occasionally came under fire from the shore. These early missions hardened both men. By December 1941, Harada was aboard the carrier Soryu, preparing for the Pearl Harbor operation. Miyazaki was at Yokosuka Air Base, flying combat air patrol over Tokyo Bay. The war they had trained for was about to begin. December 7, 1941, aboard the carrier Soryu, Kaname Harada straps into his Zero before dawn. He is first off the deck, leading the combat air patrol over the fleet. Below him, the strike planes form up Vals, Kates, Zeros, circling the carriers in a vast, dazzling spiral. Harada watches them depart toward Oahu with envy burning in his chest. He sees his friend, Lieutenant Fusada Ida, leading the 6th Buntai, a squadron of 9 planes away, and wishes him luck as the formation shrinks to specks on the horizon. Hours later, the strike force returns. Pilots wave from cockpits, holding up fingers to count their victories. Harada feels the sting of being left out. Then comes the news that Fusada Aida is dead, his fuel tank punctured. He crash dove into Kaneohe Naval Station rather than risk capture. 2 more pilots from Aida's Buntai are lost at sea. Harada stares at the empty deck where Aida's Zero should have landed, wondering if he could have made a difference if he had been there. Days later, Soryu is diverted to support the faltering invasion of Wake Island. Harada flies cap again. No enemy fighters appear on December 21st. The atoll seems quiet. But on December 22nd, when only 6 Zeros escort the bombers, the Marines put 2 Wildcats into the air. They shoot down 2 Kate bombers from Soryu, killing 6 aircrew, including Noboru Kanai, one of the Navy's most skilled navigators. Harada realizes the Americans are not going to fold. They fight back, and they hurt you when you least expect it. April 5th, 1942. Over Colombo, Ceylon, Harada finally gets his chance at aerial combat. He spots a flight of Hawker Hurricanes below and drops onto them. He fires his nose guns over the lead cockpit, startling the pilot into a turn. The Hurricane bleeds energy, and Harada slides in behind for the textbook shot, nose guns and wing cannons together. The British plane goes down in flames. He gets 3 more that day, but the face of one pilot, thrashing, struggling to open his canopy as the plane fell, burns itself into Harada's memory. 4 days later, over Trincomalee, Harada attacks a pair of Hudson bombers. He slides in below and behind, where the dorsal turret cannot reach him. Short bursts into an engine, and each bomber falls. He regroups with his formation and returns to the carrier without incident. He lands on Soryu, shaken but alive. He is credited with 3 Hurricanes confirmed, plus 2 shared kills against Hudson bombers, along with probables. But the image of that British pilot fighting to open his canopy, trapped in a dying machine, does not leave him. He replays the moment at night in the dark of the bunk room. The war is only 4 months old, and already the faces of the dead are stacking up behind his eyes. June 4th, 1942, Midway. Before the battle, Harada had sewn the Ujigami-sama amulet his parents sent into the lining of his flight suit. He flies cap again in his Shotai, 3-plane section, always cap, never the strike, Then the American torpedo bombers come wave after wave, skimming the water straight for the carriers. Harada tears into them, firing until his 20-millimeter drums run dry. In his fury, he breaks formation and cuts off his own wingman, Airman First Class Genzo Nagasawa, who pulls up hard and takes a full burst from a turret gun. Nagasawa's Zero becomes a fireball bouncing off the sea. Harada screams his wingman's name, but there is no time. More torpedo bombers. Then the dive bombers. He lands on the only carrier still afloat, Hiryu, and jumps into a fresh Zero. Seconds after he leaves the deck, a bomb strikes where he had been parked. He runs out of ammunition, then fuel. He glides the Zero down, locks the canopy open, tightens his straps, and sets it into the frothy wake of a friendly destroyer. The plane sinks. He climbs out and inflates his Kapak vest. The destroyer Makigumo circles back for him, but a flight of B-17s appears overhead, forcing the ship to flee. Darkness falls. Harada floats alone, losing hope. His watch stopped at 3:55 p.m. around midnight. He spots a shape and beats the water with his last strength, stirring the glowing plankton. Makigumo returns and hauls him aboard. The deck is slick with blood. Wounded and dying men lie everywhere, some missing limbs, others burned black. A doctor waves him below. He is given water and a bunk. The fleet is gone, 3 carriers sunk, thousands of men dead. Harada survives, but he carries the weight of the day like an anchor. By mid-October 1942, Kaname Harada had been reassigned to the carrier Hayo. He was no longer the frustrated young pilot left out of the Pearl Harbor strike. The battles at Midway and Ceylon had hardened him, but the war had a new crucible ready, Guadalcanal. On the morning of October 17th, Harada led his Shotai of 3 Zeros as escort for a strike against the island. The formation ran straight into a cloud that held 28 Marine Wildcats from VMF 121. They erupted out of the overcast, diving on the bombers. Harada spun after one Wildcat, trading tracer fire in a head-on pass. A .50 caliber round smashed into his engine, and shards tore through his left bicep. The engine began grinding. He killed it to avoid fire and glided toward the jungle, knowing he would not make the coast. The tops of palm trees rushed toward him. The Zero flipped upside down and slammed into the canopy. He hung in his harness, unconscious, soaked in gasoline. A cool liquid dripping on his face roused Harada. He unbuckled and crawled out through the bent canopy frame. His left arm was numb. A clean hole through the bicep, but the artery was intact. He found a dark puddle and drank. Then he stumbled upon a downed Kate bomber from the same strike. The pilot, Hisao Sato, stood beside the wreckage, face bloodied. Inside the twisted fuselage lay the radio man, Tadao Maruyama, gravely wounded and pinned. Harada and Sato tried to pry him free, but Maruyama grew quiet. He had died while they worked. That night, the 2 men huddled next to the dead, listening to the jungle. At dawn, dragging their injuries, they pushed northward through the brush. After several days of fever and brackish water, they reached a small base at Kamimbo Bay. A naval pharmacist patched Harada's arm. Then the malaria hit him hard. While Harada lay delirious on Guadalcanal, a new pilot entered the same fight. Isamu Miyazaki had arrived at Rabaul in November 1942, assigned to the 252nd Air Group. His squadron leader was Lieutenant Masaji Suganami, a Pearl Harbor veteran. On November 12th, Suganami led 19 Betty bombers and 30 Zeros to attack an American convoy off Guadalcanal. Miyazaki flew in the number 3 slot. When the bombers began their torpedo runs, the formation was jumped by Wildcats. In the swirling dogfight, Miyazaki latched onto a Wildcat's tail. He fired, and the fighter went down into the jungle, his first victory. But when he rejoined the formation, Suganami stood him in front of the pilots and tore into him. "Why the hell did you break away from me? Damn it, I told you not to go chasing." Miyazaki stood at attention, face burning. He promised himself and his leader he would never do it again. 2 days later, on November 14th, Suganami led 6 Zeros to escort troop transports into Guadalcanal. They fought off American fighters for hours. As fuel ran low, Suganami motioned for his wingmen to head back to Rabaul. Miyazaki and another pilot, Iwao Namino, stayed with him. Suganami angrily repeated the hand signal, then flipped his Zero into an Immelmann turn and headed back toward the transports alone. Namino and Miyazaki obeyed the order and returned. They landed and waited. No more Zeros came. Suganami was never heard from again. The loss hit Miyazaki hard. He had lost his squadron leader, the man who had just taught him his first lesson in discipline. In the weeks that followed, Miyazaki flew escort after escort, watching bombers fall, watching fuel gauges drop, watching the sea fill with wreckage and men. On one mission, he ran out of fuel and ditched his Zero in the water off Wide Bay. Soldiers in a boat fished him out, warning him about crocodiles lurking in the mangroves. Before he left, they presented him with a necklace made from crocodile teeth, which he kept tied to his flight gear as a talisman. He spent his nights in a thatched hut on Rabaul, listening to the Southern Cross wheel overhead, wondering which mission would take him. By October 1943, Miyazaki had been transferred to Wake Island with the 252nd Air Group. The war had changed. On October 5th, American carrier planes smashed the island in a massive raid. Miyazaki scrambled with the other Zeros to meet the enemy, but these were no longer the stubby Wildcats he knew. They were the new Grumman F-6F Hellcat, bigger, faster, and tougher. The Hellcats tore into the bombers on the ground and fought the Zeros on equal terms. Miyazaki lost friends that day, including Chief Petty Officer Bunkichi Nakajima, a quiet veteran who had been with him since Guadalcanal. On November 24th came an even more desperate mission. The Americans had landed on Tarawa, and the Japanese ordered the 252nd to attack the beachhead. Each Zero carried 260-kilogram bombs. Flying with bombs strapped to the belly ruined the Zero's agility. They were easy prey for the Hellcats waiting above. Miyazaki jettisoned his bombs and fought his way free, but most of his friends did not. The attack achieved nothing. The next day, 24 more bomb-laden Zeros went out with the same result. The sacrifice was pointless. In late January 1944, over Tarawa Island, Miyazaki came across a crippled Hellcat limping along the surface of the ocean. He dropped behind it for the kill. The American pilot looked back at him with a desperate, helpless expression. Miyazaki felt a surge of pity. This man was no different from him. He pulled away and let the Hellcat go. His wingmen, thinking his guns had jammed, finished the job. Miyazaki said nothing. The war was no longer about glory. By February 1944, the Marshall Islands were lost. The surviving pilots of the 252nd Air Group were ordered to evacuate to Japan. 2 Betty bombers arrived at Tarawa to carry them out. Captain Yoshitani Yanagimura, their commanding officer, chose to remain behind with the ground crews. As the bombers lifted off into the dark sky, Miyazaki looked back and saw a solitary blinker light flashing from the runway. It was Yanagimura, signaling one word in Morse code over and over, sayonara. That lonely, blinking light burned into Miyazaki's memory. The pilots flew first to Truk Lagoon, then to Saipan, waiting for transport home. On Saipan, 3 Kawanishi H-8K Emily flying boats arrived to carry them the final leg to Yokohama. The pilots lined up on the dock as their names were read off, assigning each man to a plane. Commander Tadao Funaki, a drinking buddy of Miyazaki, jokingly held up a bottle of whiskey and called out, "Hey Miya-chan, come keep me company." Miyazaki happily swapped places with Petty Officer Magoichi Kosaka to sit with Funaki. The first 2 Emilys took off without trouble. The third plane porpoised across the water, dipped a wing, and disintegrated in a ball of fire. Kosaka had taken Miyazaki's original seat. He was dead. 5 other friends died with him. The survivors cremated the bodies on a mountainside. Miyazaki stood there watching the flames, feeling the weight of the seat swap press down on him. It was a weight he would carry for the rest of his life. Back in Japan, Miyazaki was assigned to the newly formed 301st Fighter Squadron of the 343rd Air Group under Captain Minoru Genda, the architect of Pearl Harbor. The squadron flew the Kawanishi N1K2J Shidenkai, a rugged fighter that could match the Hellcat. Through the spring of 1945, Miyazaki escorted kamikaze strikes against the American fleet off Okinawa and fought off waves of carrier fighters. He watched Lieutenant Naoshi Kano, his charismatic squadron leader, lead charge after charge until Kano was killed on August 1st. He saw Warrant Officer Kanayoshi Muto, one of the Navy's toughest aces, fall in a dogfight. The squadron bled pilots at a terrible rate, and by early August, there were barely enough planes to fill a formation. On August 9th, Genda ordered a rare stand-down. Miyazaki and his comrades drove to a hillside north of Nagasaki to rest. They sat in the grass, eating lunch, watching the sky. Harada was evacuated from Guadalcanal to a hospital in Truk, then returned to Japan. By the spring of 1945, he was in Hokkaido training pilots on a revolutionary new aircraft, the Mitsubishi J-8M Shusui, a rocket-powered interceptor based on German Me-163 technology. It carried twin 30mm cannons and had a flight time of barely 5.5 minutes. The pilots trained in zeros, climbing to 15,000 feet, cutting the engine, and gliding back down without power. Many of the young trainees died in these simulated dives, unable to control the heavy aircraft. Harada did what he could to teach them, but the Shusui never saw combat. The war ended before it could be used. On the morning of August 9, 1945, Isamu Miyazaki was on a hillside north of Nagasaki, eating lunch with other pilots of the 301st Fighter Squadron. Captain Minoru Genda had given the men a rare day off from the constant patrols. Miyazaki looked up and saw a pair of B-29s glinting in the sun, and then, far below them, parachutes drifting. He barely had time to wonder what they were. Suddenly there was a flash of light and a rumbling roar that shook the mountain. The men ran down the slope and drove back to Omura Air Base, where they learned what had happened. Genda ordered every available vehicle to Nagasaki to bring out the wounded. That evening, trucks returned carrying burned and broken civilians. The war ended 6 days later on August 15th when the Emperor's voice came over the radio. For Kaname Harada. Listening at his base in Chitose, Hokkaido, the broadcast was almost unintelligible through the static, but its meaning was clear: the war was over. After the surrender, both men returned to civilian life, carrying invisible wounds. Harada was shunned by some of his countrymen who blamed the military for the nation's suffering. He struggled to find work and suffered nightmares of the pilots he had killed, especially the British pilot over Colombo whose face still haunted him. Eventually, he took over his family's kindergarten in Nagano and became its principal, teaching children the value of peace and human life. Miyazaki returned to Kure and managed the family sake business, rarely speaking of his experiences. He carried his own weight of guilt over the seat swap that cost Magoichi Kosaka his life, and the image of Captain Yanagimura's blinker light spelling goodbye stayed with him. In 1978, a Shidenkai fighter was recovered from Lake Biwa, and Miyazaki was called upon to help identify it. The plane had belonged to a man he had flown with in the 301st Squadron. The recovery opened a door in him, and he began to talk about the war, writing a book and giving interviews. Isamu Miyazaki died on April 10, 2012, at the age of 92, just a week before the 70th anniversary of the Doolittle raid. He had missed intercepting by pure chance. Masaji Suganami, who disappeared after ordering his wingmen to return to Rabaul, never returned from the sky over Guadalcanal. Hisao Sato, who survived Guadalcanal with Harada, was killed on a kamikaze mission near Formosa in October 1944. Tadao Maruyama bled to death while trapped in his wrecked Kate on the same island, a death that haunted Harada for years. At Midway, Harada's reckless maneuver led to the death of his wingman Genzo Nagasawa, whose Zero became a fireball. And at Pearl Harbor, Harada's friend Fusata Ida crashed his damaged Zero into Kaneohe, remembered as a skilled and kind leader. Kaname Harada lived on, still working as a kindergarten principal in Nagano. He would look at the faces of his students and tell them that war makes everyone a loser, that he was cursed to carry the memory of the dead. That is the final image of the last Zero fighter, not a warrior, but a man who spent his final years protecting innocence from ever being shattered the way his was. If you have family stories or memories from the Pacific War, We would love to hear about them in the comments below. Please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. Thank you so much for listening and for helping us preserve these important histories for future generations.